really happy to have you here today. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Yoshi, who will lead you through today's session. Welcome, Yoshi.
Sounds like a great start to the session. So, hi everyone, welcome. My name is Yoshi from Brussels, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this event from the Migration Summit. So, before we start, maybe talk about what is the Migration Summit. So, the Migration Summit is a month-long initiative organized by the MIT Refugee Action Hub, NAMAL, and the Karam Foundation, designed to build bridges between diverse communities and displaced learners, universities, companies, and social enterprises. Now, we want to focus on key challenges and opportunities such as co-creating pathways, learning, livelihoods for displaced people and refugees. Now, today's session specifically will be all about how can we perform research with refugees and displaced populations. And luckily, I don't have to present this by myself, but we have a huge, amazing panel of 3 researchers that are active in this field. And I would like to welcome our first panel speaker, Dilara. She is a research assistant at the Middle East Technical University, and there she conducts research with refugee children. She is very experienced in the collection of data, and she designs and develops well-being programs with those people specifically. She also works together with local NGOs supporting refugees in Turkey. So with that, I would like to invite Dilara. Feel free to present yourself and your work.
Thank you, Yoshi. Thank you so much for presentation. I have actually prepared some slides, but I won't share it. I will have just 15 minutes, and I want to be in touch with you, so I will be mostly talking about my research. So as Yoshi mentioned, I'm a research assistant and PhD candidate at Middle East Technical University in the Guidance and Psychological Counseling Department. So from my master's, actually, I have started to work about refugees, not with refugees, because at that time it was so hard to get ethical permissions to work with refugees. So I started to work with school components who are working with refugees. So I just wanted to learn their perspectives in the first place. Now I am developing a peace education program for refugee receiving schools. I have actually just this week finished the pilot implementation with the 4th graders. So hopefully it will be statistically significant. I do not have information about it yet, but I'm hoping for the best. I'm collecting the post data. So I just want to mention some discrepancies and some challenges that I've faced working and just searching the literature about the refugee work, because it was a little bit hard for me too. I want to start with the literature part mostly. So when I wanted to develop a peace education program, my jury suggests me to find one peace education program that is already working to get a framework, actually. So I was searching one. As you may know, there are lots of peace education programs by UNESCO, UNHCR, Save the Children, UNICEF. These are the most biggest NGOs that are working with refugees in the peace approach as well. So they have some peace education programs, but I had some difficulties to present these peace education programs to my jury as a PhD students, because all these programs were great, by the way, but they do not have some solid, some statistically powerful assessments in their programs. So this is this was a really challenging part for me, because if I want to use something during my PhD, it needs to be scientifically proven. But I think this is the thing with the NGOs, because while I was working with local NGOs in Turkey, I was always suggesting them to do some assessment scientifically. But of course, there are some lack of people who can do that part, or lack of time to do this. So this is the I think, I don't know, but this is the first thing that most of the NGOs gave up in the first place. But this is so important, because if I don't have this scientific background and scientific thing that I can rely on, I cannot continue to research. So these work with refugees or the peace education cannot move on in that sense. So I think this is an important one, and I know that most of the NGOs or the people who are working in there attending these sessions, and I had a chance to attend some of the sessions, and there were great programs as well about refugees around the world. But I just want to mention this at the first place, because I think this is an important challenge as a PhD student. So the other one, while I was working with refugees, of course, language is a problem, because I am speaking Turkish. Refugees in Turkey mostly speak Arabic, but I don't know how to speak Arabic. So this, of course, this is the main challenge. But the language is just I think it's just a picture that we all know and we all see, but there are lots of things behind it, because the language represents the culture, represents the personality. So if I cannot speak Arabic, I am not one of them. So it is so hard for me to communicate with them as a human being, actually, because while I was working with students, refugee students, and one time I was with my friend who can speak Arabic fluently, and we went to work with, just to play with children and to introduce ourselves. And the children in there did not speak with me, nothing. But when my friend starts to speak, just to say random things, the children again never spoke with her as well. But I can see their eyes smiling to her, because they can understand that there is someone who can understand in their own language. So I think this is really crucial, and it's really hard for non-native maybe to work with refugees, because while I was conducting interviews with them, they are always stating the positive sides. How good it is to be in Turkey, for example. How it is useful for them to go that specific school or be with that specific teacher, etc. I can never learn about the challenges or the I don't know, issues that they are having. But my Arabic speaking friends, hopefully they could learn about those things. So it was really hard for me to learn about those issues as well. So conducting research with refugees was a little bit hard for me in that sense. But another challenge I had while I was working with refugees, actually in the local side as well, because on my studies, I am trying to focus on the locals as well. I don't know all the countries, of course, but in Turkey, there are lots of research projects and NGOs working just with refugees. So this actually starts to create more hate towards the refugees, because local people always starts to state that we are here as well. Why nobody is helping us? Because of the SES level. Refugees are mostly living the urban side in Turkey, in each city actually. So there are locals who are in need as well. So when the NGOs or the governmental organizations just brought help just to the refugees, this creates so much hate and prejudice towards the refugee people. So that's why I always try to include locals as well. If I am doing seminars, for example, I am trying to include local parents too, or local students as well. And if I am conducting research or conducting interviews, I am trying to interview with local components too, so that I can get their perspective and their needs too. But I saw that this might be just about Turkey, but most of the people do not have the proper information about the refugees. How they come to Turkey, or who are helping them, like the NGOs or the government, or who is giving the money, etc. So this lack of information actually may have to this prejudice and hate as well. So if I am like giving a seminar to my students or at another university or at a conference, I always start with a phrase that please tell your parents, tell your neighbors that the Turkish government do not give any money to the refugees, because this is the really basic thing, but nobody knows about it. So when I go to a place and says that, oh, I am conducting a research about refugees, so can you help me? Or what is the problem that you are having with? So the local people always starts to say that, oh, we had that so many research about them, but why don't you ask about us, etc. So those kind of sentences that I am facing, and actually without their help, it is a little bit hard to make a social cohesion, because there are lots of projects regarding social cohesion and the adaptation of refugees in Turkey right now. But I think without getting the local perspective, I think it is impossible to do that, because who is adopting whom? So this is my main question, and you don't if you don't know the each part, it is getting impossible to find a middle way. So this lack of information and biases creates challenge actually researchers, because you cannot or at least I cannot, I couldn't get what I want from my most of the research. So at first time when I was a master's student, I want to conduct interviews with the school components to understand their perspective. But they just talk about their hate to me. So they did not actually mention anything about the refugees, how they are working, how they are doing at the school, etc. So after a while, I learned how can I go. So I spent some time at the school, at the field. So that's how actually I learned the information that I need. But I think it's a little bit hard to get information in that sense. So I know I had just 15 minutes. I just want to finish my words in here. There are actually challenges from my side in three sides. From the literature, it was hard, and from the refugee side, yes, it was hard not to be like them or not to speak Arabic, but it was hard from the local side as well, because I was not one of them either. I was not working at the school, I was at the university, I was at the research side, because most of the teachers in Turkey don't like the research side because they said that you don't know anything about the field. You are just writing something and want us to do this, but it's not the way in real life. It's not the real life. So that was challenging for me in that way. And these were my last words. Thank you so much. I think.
All right. Thank you for these insightful comments. I'm sure this will raise a lot of questions in the audience, which is great. So on that note, people in the audience that might have questions, try to write them down. I'll first introduce the other two panel members, and then we'll go on to an open discussion with everyone involved. So for our next...
Can I ask something? Maybe I can write my email address as well, just because I don't share the slides. So if anyone wants to ask something more.
You can put it in chat, definitely. So for our next speaker, I would like to invite Kula. She's a researcher from the UK, where she's a senior lecturer at the Open University. It's a university with a strategic commitment to social justice. They even offer fully funded scholarship to people seeking asylum, refugees, and forced migrants. Kula herself performs cross-disciplinary research on migration and forced displacement, where important issues and challenges related to migration and sanctuary seekers are addressed, both theoretically and through engagement with local, national, and international organizations. So with these words, Kula, please take the stage.
Thank you so much, Yoshi. Can you hear me well? Yes, and I will try to share my screen. Great.
Yes,
thank you so much. Great. I'm really delighted to be here, and thanks very much to Yoshi and the MIT React team for inviting me to be part of this panel. I am joining from the UK. As Yoshi said, I'm a member of staff at the Open University, which is the first open and distance university in the world, and also the largest university in the UK, with over 200,000 students. But first, before I start, I really wanted to share some of my own history, because this fits into my positionality as a researcher. And I come from a family of refugees. I grew up in Cyprus, which is an island in the Mediterranean Sea. And in these photos, you can see my family. My mom is in the left photo, and they are outside a refugee settlement that was created nearly 50 years ago. And these are... they stayed there for a year, and then, of course, they moved to temporary housing that was provided by the government. And they were always waiting to go back to their houses. And, of course, as I said, 50 years later, and having never returned to their houses, this was... What I can say is that it is an ongoing trauma. And it has been part of my lived experience, because I grew up with these stories of displacement. They wanted their stories to be told, they wanted their stories to be shared, and not to forget of what has happened to them. So telling and really retelling their stories was really important to them. And it has shaped, and I think it's still shaping and impacting on our lives. So what this means for me today, I'm really trying, through my research, kind of like realizing that as higher education, we're not doing enough. There is still so much we can do to open up opportunities for refugees to access and participate in quality higher education. And through my research, I'm trying to show commitment, really, and understanding of social justice issues, really through ensuring that the stories and the voices of forcibly displaced people, but also other members of non-dominant communities, are heard in the creation, in the production of knowledge, and the dissemination of research. And here is really a key question that kind of like I'm posing to you, and really a core argument for me in today's talk, but also in response to the discussion we're going to have in the panel, is really that we need to work towards advancing a new sensibility in the field, which is about conducting research with and alongside refugees and forcibly displaced communities, and really replace this dominant notion of how we have been doing research, which is about on refugees and for refugees. And I will try to show how I kind of like approach this. I'm trying to address this question through some studies that I have been doing with others recently. So there are 3 studies really that I would like to draw on today. The first one was with refugee teachers in Jordan. The second one is with a group of young, out-of-school young people in a refugee settlement in Uganda. And the third one is really UK-based, which is looking at my own institution and really examining the transitions to distance and online higher education with our first cohort of, first formal cohort of students from refugee backgrounds that have joined the university this year. So to draw on this, the first study, this was completed last year. As I said, it took place in Jordan with English language teachers in refugee settings in Jordan. And it was a collaboration with 2 NGOs, Mosaic Education, Centrality, and the Open University. And this was really a pilot study. It was a feasibility study where we were trying to understand the context before we could develop some interventions with technology really to support language learning. And a big focus of the study ended up being about responses to COVID-19, because while we were doing the study, COVID was still a great concern really for everyone. And I just want to really dwell a bit on the methodology that we followed in this study, which is an approach which is called PEER, which stands for Participatory Ethnographic Evaluation and Research. And PEER is really a qualitative research approach. It is, as the name says, it is participatory, and really it enables us to build an understanding of stories of social life through collecting views, stories, narratives from the teachers in this particular case. And it was carried out by peer researchers who are members of the community and in which the research was undertaken. So the method really allowed the peer researchers to do interviews with members of their own social, and in this case, professional network. And the information that was gathered was highly detailed, really. It was very context specific. And the method enabled the peer researchers to really gather in-depth insights into the daily lives and practices of teachers in those settings. And very important, and one of the really key reasons why we followed this methodology was that the participants, the teachers who were working with us, were included in all stages, in various stages of the research, from actually looking at the research questions, discussing the research questions, choosing themes where they wanted to focus the study on, developing a protocol in terms of doing the interviews with their peers, but also involved in the data analysis of that was produced through this work. And just some, like the 4 key characteristics of the peer approach. As I said, it is qualitative, it is participatory because the peer researchers really play an active role in that. It provides data and evidence that can be used immediately, really, to frame the design of programs, which was something that we were very interested in. But also it's a rights-based approach. It's about empowering, it's about the agency that marginalized people can bring into the research process. So in practice, what did that mean was that we recruited 7 teachers who were teaching at that point in the tertiary and higher education in Jordan. Each of them interviewed 2 peers from their own professional networks. And of course, there was an orientation meeting. There were 6 online sessions where they received training. We offered training in qualitative research methods. And as I said, this involved actually co-designing the research questions and the interview protocol. We looked at ethics and safeguarding, how we could plan the interviews, but also coding and analyzing the data and really writing up the findings. In these sessions, they came up with 4 core themes that they wanted to actually structure the whole research and frame the whole research around. For example, communicative approaches to language, like the practices that teachers follow in language. They did repeated interviews with each peer, and they didn't really have to actually collect the data. Actually, the data was captured through these one-to-one debrief meetings with one member of the research team. And at the end, we had the one-to-one interviews with one of the researchers. And as I said, there were involved in the data analysis. Everything was happening digitally. All the interactions were really digitally mediated, and really thinking and reflecting on what the data is telling us and helping us to interpret this data. But also throughout the project, we tried to identify opportunities where the peer researchers themselves, they could come along and actually share this work. Like this event, which was happening at the Open University. So that was a panel discussion with the peer researchers, but also they were invited in a webinar that we were organizing with UNHCR and the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium, where again, they presented their work in this project. So the second study, and I'm not really going to stay much on this because this is a study that draws on the same methodology. So perhaps I'm going to skip this. And I'm going to go to the third one, which is about an ongoing study. It's kind of like halfway through really, which is about access and participation in higher education. And this is situated in a strategic initiative within the Open University. It's called the Open Futures Sanctuary Scholarships. And in this year, as I said, we welcomed the first formal group of students from refugee backgrounds who are either on full scholarships, studying at an undergraduate degree, or they are studying a pre-university foundational module, which is called Access Module. And this is a group of 44 students in this program. And it is really a very important initiative for my institution. So we designed this study with an aim to really understand the experience of students, but also to generate evidence that is going to inform the strategic planning and change at the institution in the next years, because the institution has committed that the scholarships program will be ongoing and it will carry on in the next few years. So in this study, we follow a different methodology, and we are really drawing on this cultural value model, which is a model that has been developed by a wonderful colleague, Professor Malik Gillespie and colleagues at the Open University, and really allows the stakeholders. It is multi-stakeholder, as I say here, and it is collaborative because we put the students and their needs at the center, and really it allows the various stakeholders to actually assess the successes in the program, gaps in the provision, problems that we encountered in this first year, and what we could be doing really around those various components that were identified. So when I say stakeholders in this case, I mean students in the scholarship program. This is also the operational team, as we call it, which is the fundraising team at the Open University, is the tutors that they are working directly with the students, the personal learning advisors, we have student support teams, we have academic services, academics, of course, who are all directly involved in this program. But we are also involving the senior management in the institution because this is, as I said, situated within strategic programs, such as the widening participation program, but also the equality and diversity and inclusion program, which are really key programs in the university. It's still ongoing, but we're really entering the phase where we are bringing together the various stakeholders to actually share some evidence and discuss and really look at what has the program achieved in these first 9 months. But I just wanted to share an output really, kind of like an online space, an online resource that we have created, which is the Open Sanctuary Hub, which is in the Open Learn platform at the Open University. And it is really designed thinking of the needs of the students, and really looking to support the students, their journeys, both our sanctuary students, but also others who might not be part of the OU, but they also they could really draw on these resources. So we, in this hub, we have collated educational resources that are tailored to refugee students, their needs, and will really help them develop core study skills. And for example, resources include English language, digital literacy skills, developing good academic practice, or skills that are really needed to study online and at a distance. And just to wrap up, because I started this presentation saying that one of the aims is really to share stories. And I wanted to go back to the study that we did in Jordan and really share this micro-portrait from Ahmed, who was one of our peer researchers. And as you can see, he's Sudanese. He's currently in Jordan, and he has been a very novice teacher, working with an NGO for 1.5 years. He had no formal teaching qualification. He has done some informal training programs, really. But other than working as a teacher, he was also involved in a variety of activities in his community. And for Ahmad, he kept saying that he's not a teacher and that his role is really to give back to the community and really build refugee communities. And he also he was following also an approach in the classroom, which was very collaborative and really telling his students that we are all learners in this space and we're here to help one another. And for him, being a peer researcher, it was really to develop skills on how to collect data, how to ask questions. His participation in this project really helped him to learn how to structure stories or information or types of questions, and really brought a recognition that while you're interviewing, you should really help the person to talk freely and express what they feel about their roles or their experience. Ahmad really had a really strong responsibility, a sense of responsibility about his role and about ensuring that he communicates the stories of his peers in trust and really appropriately. And he had this longer vision that he wanted to really do his own research, interviewing refugee leaders from his country about their struggles. And it also allowed him to have conversations with peers, really creating the space and have conversations that he couldn't have before, and really share their experiences, talk about our fortunes, while in the past it wasn't really possible, and really laugh and talk. So it was really important, and these kind of like conversations were very powerful. And I'm finishing with this, just to remind ourselves really, some kind of like established practices in the field. And this is a poem. You might have come across this. Yusuf Kazmi, he's a refugee himself, Palestinian refugee. He has this brilliant collection, Writing the Camp. And I will just allow some time for you to read it. And I really find very powerful this image in the end, where you have the anthropologist living with a jar of homemade pickles and 3 cassettes full of voices from the houses of people that they just see as subjects of their research. And this image really describes very well a relationship which has been and maybe is still kind of rather dominant in our research practices, where there is no exchange, there is really no return, and it's quite a disturbing colonialist mirror of taking but not giving back. And it really opens up a discussion that maybe we're going to have here today about the principles, the values and ethics really of doing research with non-dominant communities. And it's about the ethics and politics really of knowledge production. And I will finish here really kind of like really reflecting on the methodologies that have been presented, that I think have really allowed us to address some of the limitations of the methods we have, and maybe kind of like seen as a form of action to reduce, to mitigate maybe these historical injustices and kind of like oppression that marginalized and disadvantaged groups like refugees have been facing. And I'm not saying that actually it's kind of, I'm not saying that this really helps us resolve all the issues, but it's kind of like an attempt from myself and also colleagues to really take some active steps that maybe help us address these injustices, as I said. So thank you very much for listening. I would like to really finish by thanking all the colleagues who have been part of this journey, and this work would have not been possible really without them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kula, for this great introduction. Then I would like to invite our last but not least panel member, Evan Cole, originally from the US, now mostly based in Brussels. In the past, he has a lot of experience teaching specifically programming to refugees and asylum seekers coming to Brussels. So, Evan, with this, please take the stage. You're also still muted.
There, audio and video. Good.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Yoshi, for the introduction, and Kula and Dilara first. Oh, that went to the next slide by accident. How did that happen? Stop. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about my experience researching, more teaching, but then also looking into how you would research education for displaced people. And from my point of view, you'll see in just a moment, I found it very helpful to focus on the aspects of the individuals I'm working with and the constraints that they face to try to frame the research in a way that might find unexpected connections. So for better understanding where I come from, I'm from a different field, so I'm by no means an expert in displacement or refugees or anything in that world. The field I come from, computing education, there's very little overlapping literature between the world of displacement and the world of computing education. So there's not much for me to draw on, but I would like to be working with, and I'm working with experts of displacement, and I'd like to impact people facing displacement. So this position, how do I do research in a context I don't necessarily understand, along with all those colonial and like power dominance issues that are coming along with that? How do I participate in that research? So a little more background on me to get there. I'm originally from the US, and I've been living in Belgium now for almost 8 years. And really by background, I'm more of a practitioner than a researcher. So when I did start teaching though, I was always interested in translating research into practice because I noticed there's a big difference between how researchers say you could teach programming and how people actually teach it. Then through that work, I met Yoshi, and we started working more formally on how to research these questions of computing education, especially in contexts that have more limited resources and students have less availability of time or experience. So my experience working with refugees and migrants actually started by chance. In 2019, I met the organization Hack Your Future Belgium, which offers free trainings in web development to refugees and migrants in Belgium. At the time, I was 100% about the education, and I was just happy to be teaching people who didn't have access to other trainings. It was sort of a side bonus for me that it was refugees, or bonus in the sense that I wasn't simply just teaching someone who'd paid a lot for the class. But then over time, as I met the students and learned more about forced displacements, my interest has shifted. And now I'm more specifically interested in how computing education research can be applied in contexts of forced displacement. So working at this intersection of computing education and displacement, I still have my expertise in the education side, but I need to definitely know the limits of my work and my expertise and be able to step back and listen to see how I can help people adapt what I know to a context that I can't understand. So coming from there, I find that sometimes it can be misleading emphasis to go first to the terms refugees or displaced person, because it can distract from deep similarities between your research and what someone from a different field might be doing. So someone might be researching something that is actually fundamentally very similar to what you are, but doesn't look like it on the surface because you might have different labels applied. And it can also, in the other sense, draw attention to shallow similarities. So just by referring simply to refugees, or I teach refugees in Belgium versus Kakuma, there is a shallow similarity in the sense that both people that I'm teaching may have a particular status, but it draws attention to that shallow similarity rather than the very deep differences between what it means to teach someone in Belgium versus teaching someone on site in Kakuma. So I find it's helpful when framing research or questions or discussions to be explicit and intentional about defining what are relevant aspects of the people that I work with and what are relevant constraints of the context that I work in. So what do I mean by that? I might be teaching a refugee to program, but that label is not relevant at the moment that I'm teaching them. What might be more relevant is their educational background, their native language. How much time do they have over the week to study? What is their access to computers and to internet? How busy are they with their family? And constraints of the context. So if I were teaching in a camp in Kakuma, one of the constraints is definitely going to be internet and power connectivity. The students may not be consistently there. They may have to leave, they may have to come back over time, so there may not be consistent attendance. And if I were to focus on those constraints that I'm facing as the research educator, then it's more easy for me to talk with someone who teaches in a different context, for us to see the similarities rather than the differences. Yep, so what are the aspects and what are the benefits that I see of framing research in terms of the aspects of individuals, the relevant aspects, and the relevant constraints? On one hand, I found that it can make it easier to know your participants more deeply when you're focused on the different aspects of their life and their identity and figuring out how those different aspects are relevant to your work. You need to spend more time getting to know someone and listening to them to be able to do that. I find that it can give better clarity to the research purpose and questions. So instead of approaching what feels like this huge vague question of how would I teach a displaced population what they need for a job, for example, like remote technical work. That's very vague, but if I start thinking and narrowing down to what are the aspects of these individuals. So actually the people that I'll be teaching, for example, they all have a university degree, but it's not recognized in their country that they're in. They all have experience working with computers, but have just simply not worked remotely. So by starting more narrowly thinking about these aspects of these individuals, it can give more clarity of purpose to the research and the questions you might ask. I also think that this is then grounds for unexpected collaborations, inspiration, or solutions. When you start looking at other work and you start discussing your work with other people in these terms, it's easier to ignore those superficial differences or similarities and get down to what might be something that would actually really help your context, but no one had thought of connecting yet because they were looking at different labels. And then sort of the inverse is reaching a broader audience with your work. Someone, for example, teaching at a community college, they may not first jump to refugee research to see what techniques might I use in my class. But if you're framing your research more broadly and even in your abstract, if you're including description of your learners' identity aspects or the constraints that you face, that can make your research more approachable for someone who isn't self-identifying as a researcher of refugees or displaced people. And that is my little introduction here.
Thank you, Evan, for that presentation. All right, so now that all our panel members have introduced themselves and shared a bit about their background and their expertise, I would like to open up the floor to everyone in the audience. In order to keep it easy to navigate, I would suggest that everybody that has a question they want to ask can use the Zoom reaction of raise hand to raise their hand. I'll call out your name and then you can simply unmute yourself and ask the question to the panel you want to ask. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. And while we're, okay, I see one question from Kathy, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining today actually because I'm getting ready to start on a project for my university related to program development. So I am at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and we have recently received a large endowment to begin a program for recently resettled refugees in the area. But of course, it's something new for the university, and we want to make sure that we create a program that meets the needs of students, but also seamlessly support them into the community in the university, also into the local community, and provides the skills to help them achieve success here. And I joined this group hoping that there might be some collective knowledge that you guys could give me. So just to kind of give you a little background, the initial grant that I've received is to study current programs in several European contexts beginning this summer. As some of you who are stateside may know, we do not have a lot of coordinated effort here in regard to this. So any advice you have, I'd be very appreciative.
Can I say something, Katie? I would say that it's really important to have a really key person who is in contact with the students. And we, in our case, we kind of like realized that halfway through the program. And now there is a person in place really that the students could go to. But the students are working, I mean, we are an online and distance university, so I think it's different in your case. So I think what we were trying to do is really to create spaces where students could come and interact. And maybe it's something that Ivan was saying, that we kind of like think that it is a unique group, that they have similarities and maybe they want to interact with one another. This has been quite a struggle for us, but also the fact that students don't really meet one another as such. We don't really have the face-to-face space for them to come along. And I would suggest that it's quite important actually to have that. And it could be like some drop-in sessions or some kind of like a space that they know that they could go to, and people that they have built relationships with really, that they could discuss and really have conversations. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but really having a key person has been quite an important feature in our program, really.
Well, that's great.
Is there anything you would like to add to that from the student well-being side, or are we ready to go to the next question? No, then I'll ask Lorraine, please share a question.
It's not a question. I'm actually going to help answer Katie's question. So in the Migration Summit, there were lots of other sessions around higher education for refugees, around initiatives supporting refugees. So it'd be really good to have a look back at other sessions around this. UNHCR did quite a few. There was one earlier today about connected learning. So there's a lot of rich stuff in this summit about this. Another thing that I think is important is, you said you're going to look at context within Europe. Also look at what's happening further afield and look at what's happening in country. So Manal, who was from UNHCR in the previous session, spoke about the 15 by 30 goal. And a lot of this is going to be achieved by first country of asylum universities. And I think it's really important to look at what they're doing, because they're doing really interesting things. So I think it's important to look what's happening in Europe, but also countries of first asylum, because this is where the majority of refugees are in fact hosted. And also, look through the people, anyone that you come across in the Migration Summit in the sessions. If you want connections, just email Migration Summit, and then we'll try to connect you with anyone you ask, because we really have a wealth of knowledge within our community. And please join our community, because you're the sort of person we need to be part of this community, who's really interested in and really want to understand how to be more nuanced in the way they approach the work.
Can I add something to this?
Definitely.
Maybe it's my insight actually from my study, but it may help to Katie as well. So I start like Lorraine said, actually, I started to search what have been done in Turkey, in Europe, in the world, around the world. So this was the first thing, but I was trying to find like a, I don't know, beneficial or the good one, but I conducted a need analysis with the school as well. So you may do this with the university too, because I realized that the things that I think that they need, they don't need that. So the need was so different at the school, and we got all surprised with my old professors in my jury. But so conducting a need analysis, I think it's a really important one. And if you want to do a pilot implementation, please do that, because it gives insights as well, so that you can change the relevant points. And please, if you have time or people or funding to do, you can conduct the post interviews as well, because with the scales, with the program, of course you can get information, but I think this is limited. So by asking them in person what they like, what they don't like, so you can decide what to change. So it was helpful for me, so that's why I wanted to share it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no raised hands, so people, please, whenever you have a question about anything, can be from any perspective, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question. In the meantime, I'll maybe propose a question of my own. We already kind of touched upon this during the initial presentations, but when we want to do research with these kind of people, is there any potential harm that can occur when we do this type of research? Is there anything we should take into consideration so we can prevent, limit the negative outcomes that could occur? Anybody has any insight they want to share on that?
Can I start, if I can?
Yes.
Because I am getting a trauma education for almost 3 years now. So I think this is an important one, and most people who are working with refugees may neglect it. Thank you so much for asking this question, Yoshi. I think this is an important one. So while we are conducting research, we are asking questions, whether in interviews or whether in scales. So this might be re-traumatizing for refugees, especially, if they are escaping from war, or it doesn't have to be war, but just changing home, for a child might be traumatizing sometimes. So we forget about this important issue, I think. So if we got an ethical permission, we think that, now we can ask those questions because we are ethical, we are doing this as it is written, etc. But I think we need to be more careful in a human sense, because we don't know what this person was going through or is going through. So even a word, a sentence, a picture that we want them to draw might be re-traumatizing. So I actually suggest to researchers to end the research or the interview or the questionnaire with the resourcing questions. So at the end of the research or the program, I am always asking, what do you do when you feel upset, or who is your best friend, or what games do you like? So do you want to play one? So I'm trying to finish in that sense while resourcing the child or the person that I am interviewing. So I think this is not about refugees, but this is all about ethics in research, because while we are conducting research, everybody, depending on the subject, everybody might get triggered. So I think this resourcing is helpful for now. So that's why I want to share it.
Do you have anything to add to that, Evan or Kula?
Can I come in, Evan, or would you like to go first?
I can go second.
Yes, I think it's a really important question, Yoshi, and I think actually kind of trying to anticipate what might be the harm. It's hard. I mean, we all know that we go into all this work with all good intentions, I think, but actually we may be creating harm. And I'm going to draw on a couple of examples that is from the study that I I haven't really talked much about the study in Uganda with young people, but it is about access to health services, and it was about health rights. And we had young people working with us as peer researchers. And one of the topics that they selected actually to do research about was about sexual violence. So they were going to their peers, to other young people in their communities, and they were exposed to stories that were very sensitive. So in a sense, through our work and kind of like reflecting backwards, yes, we did all the safeguarding. There was a really, really rigid process in terms of safeguarding people that they could go to and talk, but they were exposed to these stories. And we had one of the peer researchers who actually was reflecting on that and said that because she had opportunities to kind of like do other things and finish secondary education and get a job, she was kind of like saying that she felt that she thought that things have improved on this matter, but because she had these conversations with her peers, she realized that issues around sexual violence are still so prominent in that particular settlement. So that brings lots of ethical issues for us as researchers really doing work with young people in those settings, but also having the peer researchers and again, reflecting on that and really through our conversations with the peer researchers, we kind of like work with them because they are insiders of their community, but because they are working with us and they are getting some money because there was payment to do this work, they were kind of like approached by members of their communities as outsiders in this case. So again, I'm not saying that this was a harm, but this was a kind of like a situation that they found themselves in because of their participation to this study, being an insider and an outsider and having to kind of like face these interactions with members of their community. So again, these were things that we were not really anticipating, I have to say. And as having kind of like completed the fieldwork now, we're kind of like reflecting on these ethical issues that arose in our study.
I think there's also like the anthropologist poem. There's the silent risk of just losing trust, that you're even there to help people, that you want to help them, that you're willing to listen. And that's a difficult one to see because that harm isn't necessarily immediate. You're not bringing up an existing trauma. You're not changing maybe for the worse the way that things actually are, but you're breaking that bridge for the future. So I don't have like any solution, of course, but like I feel like it's almost more important to approach these sorts of research projects first as a relationship, and then the research follows if there is a relationship, and not to try to coerce it into being for the research at the expense of anyone. And of course, it's difficult too, because people will often just smile and go along or say, yes, it's good, so that you can only get that honest answer if first you have the relationship. So the way that I would approach something like this is to put the research second and know that in the long term, we can do better research. We can have a bigger impact if we keep the relationship and just prioritize that over any particular deliverable.
Thank you, Evan. Lorraine, feel free to ask your question or make your comment.
Thanks. So I guess it's a question and comment, just sort of, leading on from what Evan and you all were saying about the sort of complexity of, of doing research with populations that are so vulnerable. And I like what you said, Evan, put the relationship first and then put the research second. But I wonder, is there a way, whilst doing research, that we can make sure that we contribute back to the community and not just go and do research? Because it just seems so exploitative. The researcher comes from their position of privilege, usually from a Western university, from, my experience, with a big grant, going to these communities to do the research. They go and they write a paper and they write things that will never help the community they're researching, be that the community can't even read or understand. So is there a way that we can find a way so that the researcher actually contributes. You know, are you teaching the community, or are you doing some sort of community service? And then in that way, it feels a bit less exploitative, because it seems very, we talk about colonization. It seems very a colonial attitude, or us coming to do research on you, for you. We're just going to read, speak to you, write about you, and then halas, we're done. It just seems so unpalatable.
We had this dilemma, Lorraine, in our work, I have to say, if I may jump here, because when we started the study this year with colleagues at the OU, with our students on the scholarships, we were kind of like thinking, well, we don't want to do this, we just want to really give something back to this community. And really not just collect data, and that's it really. So one of the things that we try to do, and I'm not saying that this is like a very successful example, but we think that at least we're giving something back, is to offer these kind of like sessions about academic practice really and skills. So this is kind of like us volunteering time to have these sessions with them. It wasn't really part of the study. This was not part of the time that was allowed, kind of like the university gave us, but we kind of like negotiated to actually be able to do this. And we bring the students together in these sessions where it's about developing of academic English as academic practice, really. So that's just a kind of like a small example, but I think your question is a really important one, and I would like to hear from colleagues about things that they are doing really to try to address this issue, because absolutely we don't want research to be exploitative. And sometimes I think you feel powerless because you realize that you can't really do much to change people's lives. At least I felt very often that I am in this situation. You kind of like question why I'm doing this, what does it offer, and how it's actually, because I personally do believe that education is transformative, but I think it takes time to see this happening. So it's kind of like how you create these transformations at the very micro level of, a research project that's happening over a year, It's hard, but yeah, absolutely. I would like to hear from others, actually.
If you want to add something, Dilara, feel free to go.
Yeah, I can just give an example from my own research. And thank you, Lorraine. This was a significant question, I think. And thank you, Kaula. I hope my pronunciation right. The last things that you have said really touch me because I am at that place right now. I just want to give an example, like I said, from my own research. So it was not so like successful, or I don't want to say that, oh, I have done this and it worked and everybody felt good, etc. But I think it opened the gate at least. So while I was developing the program, I got some expert opinions from the professors from different fields about the program. So one of my professors suggested me that why don't you ask the teachers? Because they are the practitioners, they know the students, and I have never thought about it because I was so focused on the academics. So I asked the classroom teachers and the school counselors as well. I sent the program and I got their opinion. So it, of course, improved my program, but it also helped me to bond with them, actually. It helped for our relationship as well, because I was not the one like, oh, I came here, I need to implement this academic stuff, you don't need to know about this, etc. But I want to learn from their opinion as well. So I think it was helpful for me too. So I just want to share it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilara. We have...
Can I jump in, like, to say a comment, like, related to what Kula and Dilara is saying? I think this is very insightful. And I was actually like, while you were talking, I was thinking on a storytelling session that we had like on Summit on the beginning of the month. And I mean, like as part of research, you get in contact with people, but at the same time, you're trying to be as inclusive as possible, right? And Kula, you were reflecting, in what way, you can also be impacting in their lives while you're doing research. And so I think what's key around all this is creating that safe space with whoever you're talking with, right? And so, when I was listening to some storytelling experts, they were like, sometimes I'm not like, okay, come tell me your story, or in your case, okay, like this very well-structured, question that I have for my research. But essentially it's like, how can you be getting different items and information from like questions where you are bonding before doing research and then getting like more granular, right? And so I think, it's a nice exercise when we are doing research and interacting with this kind of people, just like creating that safe space before that. But yeah, thank you for the panel. It was amazing to hear your insights.
But can I come back, Camila, to this?
Sorry, Joshi, we are mixing you.
We have another question from the audience, so I think we have to move on to the next question.
And then I can come back to this, Camila. Yeah.
Can I also answer that?
So, really quick.
Okay, so there's many things that I came to mind also when they're speaking, but the short answer that I would give is, if you think traditionally people say research and design, I'd actually flip them, and I'd say design first and research later, because there's a lot that you can learn from design methodologies. Like a lot of the interview techniques, building personas, developing first a user empathy. I think a lot of that, I actually consider myself more of a designer than a researcher in most of what I do. Even if what I end up doing looks like research or comes out like research, I find that using design methodologies, which place the person you're working with first, are just better than a lot of research methodologies, which come from a history of observation and measurement. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that elaboration. So, Emily, feel free to ask your question.
Thank you, Yoshi. So, hi, I'm Emily from Cambridge University. My research area is about social innovation, but I'm very curious. I want to ask the researchers in this audience, is that sympathy is one of your key motivation to pursue your research regarding the refugees? And also the same question, I wonder, is that sympathy the same key reason for employers to recruit refugees? Thank you.
Can I go on this one? Because that, especially the second part, the employment, lines up very well with the work that we were doing, Yoshi and I, where we're training refugees in Belgium to become junior developers. So we were working with employers. And unfortunately, I mean, employers, in our experience, of course, it's narrow. I found a difference between the people that you deal with individually from the company and then what might be decided at a higher level within the company. And so very often the people doing the outreach or working with us or interviewing our students really genuinely do care. But then when it makes it higher up and then the numbers are looked at, someone says, well, like, actually, it will take us more to onboard this person than someone else. So not moving forward. And so a lot of also feeling like the arrangement of our partnership was for them to say that they're helping our students, but then when they actually would have to do that extra difficulty, it didn't happen. Now, of course, that's not true for everyone. There's definitely some companies and people that did a lot of great effort for our students. But I think there's a fair bit of the sympathy coming in on the individual level then, so the people that we'd work with who cared, which doesn't necessarily align with the institutional level of hiring. But then at the research question too, how does sympathy work into research? That's a really tough one for me too, because Kula said, you want to help the person, but you can't. So one of our alumni presented, he shared his story earlier. And what he said is, Hack Your Future was helpful, but I needed a lawyer. And so there's just so many times when I'm aware that the work that I do, the research I do, only helps someone who is in a position to be helped by that. And often those are the students who are already resettled, already have their work permits, might already be learning the local languages. So it's difficult to then balance this want to know and participate with your people, but also you need to, at a certain point, be the separated researcher without becoming that detached observer you'd write a poem about. So it's something that I'm always in tension with and not sure about how to solve. It is a problem, yeah.
Can I follow up on that with the sympathy question? So I get a sense, in a way, at least for the institution that I'm at, is that they're kind of coming from this with like savior complex, and in regard to that means that we're overlooking, for example, like you said, this training is helpful, but I needed a lawyer. Looking at what are the needs of the individual, each individual, and are we designing something that is meeting those needs, and can we meet those needs, or are those needs met by someone else aside from who we are?
I'm not gonna,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't want to answer. I'd like to hear others, but I'd like to add on my own little half follow-up question to that, which is, are we providing it? If they don't have access to it, is what we're providing of any value? And how do we check for that?
Go ahead, Kula.
I'm kind of like reflecting really on the question about sympathy, but also what Ivan just asked. I think there is a bit of a saviorism in our field, thinking that, we are based in, the high-income countries, all the development, and we're going to save people and institutions that are based in low and middle-income countries. I think increasingly, I would like to believe that things are changing. I would like to believe that there is a change in how we're doing things. And it's not just sympathy, it's actually believe that, people have the right to participate, and actually we're making the spaces for them to participate, and they are making their own spaces to participate, So it's, in a sense, it shouldn't be us creating those spaces. And going back to the comment about feeling powerless, yes, feeling powerless, but at the same time, I think, as I said, I do believe that education is transformative, and I have seen this. I think I'm coming to this from my own personal experience of, as I said, from my family's history, and how actually I really don't think there's any greater good for change other than education. So I think through our work and through working with these communities, even though change might be long-term, that's the issue with education and educational research. We can't see immediate effects. We can't see immediate change, but it has the potential to be transformative for people's lives. And I think that's why we're doing what we're doing. I really don't know if I'm answering your question, Emily, but yes, I think I will carry on reflecting on that actually, and trying to kind of like interrogate myself and the work that we're doing. And your question even about value, are we the ones who are going to give the response to this? Whose value, what value? It's up to everyone. It's up to individually to respond to that question, isn't it?
And you also mentioned that that a lot of people are already making their own space, and it's easy to come in with a solution. But something that I've heard in so many of the sessions this year and last year's summit is just trust us with money. Or like people from Kukuno say, like, we already have this project, but no international organization will give us money. They don't trust us with funding. They don't think we can execute. So like, I wonder if the actual humble way to help with no sympathy is to not help. And just like, they ask for something, you say, okay, I trust you. It's hard to like feel so great about that in the savior way, but it might be the better way.
Yeah, but also reinforcing power, isn't it? Because if you have money, as going to kind of like implement projects with money, money brings power. And no matter, all the efforts we're making to actually mitigate this or, kind of like eliminate power dynamics, I think they are there. They're always there. And part of that is because you are coming with the money, isn't it? You're the one who is actually having the power to make things happen. And we see this in UK higher education. I mean, to the councils that provide research in the UK, they always ask for a UK-based organization to be the lead in any work that is taking place. So it's problematic at the outset, really.
Maybe there's room for a new shell corporation that exists in the UK and just channels money and doesn't touch it.
Yeah. There have been pockets of change, I would say, through some recent work and through some research, kind of like funding distribution, which is actually giving money to in the countries and organizations in the countries, but they're still going through the all the processes and the kind of like procurements, and everything is through UK. So in a sense, all these are kind of like reinforcing all these power dynamics.
Thank you. So this actually ties in really well with the conversation I had earlier with people that I work with. And in the academic world, we always, whenever we receive money, it's always to do one project for a very specific amount of time. So the question we'd like to ask is, what can we do during the project to ensure that some part of it can live on within the organizations that we're collaborating with? So it doesn't have to end whenever the project funding ends. If the project funding ends after 2 years, what can there be left? Anybody wants to think about it or go on?
So I'm not sure if I'm going to answer, but maybe add more complexity. So often when research grants are given, they don't want you to do implementation. They just want you to research. And I think this is problematic with the way research funding is done, especially in the humanitarian development context. Okay, if you're investigating, I don't know, the political economy of a country, that's different. When you're investigating people and situations in crisis, when grant giving institutions insist that this money is only to do research and not to do any project implementation, this becomes problematic because, what you said, Joshi, what lives on is the sort of money to start a project, to create something new. That's what lives on, because the research, when you write the paper, khalas, it's done. But we really want to find a way for for a project that supports the community. And how can we influence research institutions that fund this sort of space to, how can we insist that the money isn't just to do research?
Anyone from the panels that wants to add to that, or no? All right.
I think the issue of sustainability. Sorry, Yoshi. Sorry, I just jumped in.
Go ahead.
I think you're raising the issue of sustainability really in those communities, of approaches or things that we're doing. I'm going to reflect on a different piece of work really that I led, which is not with refugees, but it was with health workers in low and middle income countries, and where we were working in the creation of an online collection really as resources. And it was at the beginning, and really discussions we had with my institution, but also with the funder, that these are going to be open educational resources. And the university in that aspect kind of committed that we're going to maintain this forever. So it's difficult because the funding has finished, but it is an institutional responsibility that, we have the platform, we maintain the platform, and we maintain this online collection, which is targeted at health workers working in the field of antimicrobial resistance. So that's at the very, maybe a minor example really, but it goes back to institutions really taking this collective responsibility. But another thing that I think is important to consider when we're designing studies and projects is really the ways that we are working with these communities, and really trust and allow them to take ownership of things that we are doing, of maybe the tools, the platforms, the resources, the approaches. So it becomes part of their everyday practice. And again, drawing on this example, it's really kind of like maybe working bottom up, trusting. And I think someone raised the issue of trust earlier. It's, when we're co-creating and co-designing resources, as in the case of this project, this becomes part, and using examples from their own practice, really understanding the context and how this is going to be situated in a particular context, in a particular work environment. You allow the people to actually take this forward if they want to. And they are not really relying on us to do that. And I think it's something, I think sustainability, it should be built and designed at the outset of any project, and really consider these issues, because sometimes it comes very late in the process, you're thinking about it when you're exiting a project, really. But really, it's, Ivan said that it's about designing, we need to design for sustainability if we want to make this happen, and really consider indicators of sustainability maybe in our projects.
Right, Dilara, you wanted to add something to this?
Yeah, actually, I just want to add a different point of view, because I'm not from a developed country and high GDP country. So since Turkey is a low GDP country, we don't have that much funding. So I just want to talk about my own experience, because I think this may add different point of view to the conversation, because we all think now from the conversation, I got that all research or all refugee research is done at the developed countries, but it's not. So that's why I just want to add that point too. We don't have that much funding. So I am doing my PhD thesis without funding, actually, and I am paying for my road, for all the things that I am done on myself. So I think this is another problem too, from that point of view, and it affects of course, the work, the motivation of the academics, of the research as well. But about the sympathy and the powerlessness, I just want to add that I started to think to quit research, quit academia, because I started to feel sympathy, because this is a really, I think, sad fact, but at the school, children cannot have lunch, and they are hungry. So if they are hungry, they cannot learn about peace or the conflict resolutions, all the skills that I want to give them. This is impossible, and I started to feel sympathy at that level, and I started to feel that I am so powerless, and the thing that I am doing actually is nothing comparing to these basic needs. So that's how I started to feel sympathy, and I just want to add this different point of view to the conversation. I just want to add that because we don't have that opportunity here, and I'm sure that most of the countries do not have that opportunity. Of course, not UK, maybe not United States, but all other low or the middle GDP countries may have these problems as well.
Given that we're approaching the end of our time slot, Evan, you still wanted to add something. Can you make it a 1 minute contribution?
I actually had more questions about it, so let that drop. There's a question in the chat.
All right. So there was a question in the chat. I think, Lorraine, you can maybe get in contact via email after this session is over. So then I think it's time for us to conclude this session. So thanks everyone for joining. As we go out, I would like to rapid fire one final question, and that is, anyone that now attended here, do you have any resources or organization they should look at or things they should look at if they might want to get into this research, any online resources they can inspect, modify, and maybe let's finish up on that question as we are saying goodbye to everyone.
I'll make something up and go first. Oh, cool.
No, go first because go first, everyone.
I would say learn first about what it is like to be the people that you want to study. So don't dive into the research, meet the types of people you'd like to work with, read about them, learn. Like Dilara mentioned, she's doing the trauma research. I would say prepare yourself and your expectations for who you'll be working with, and then later figure out the research side.
Right. Thank you. Kula, still a quick fire? Or?
I think I completely agree with Ivan. I think prioritizing, really understanding the context of the research before you even consider doing any work.
All right, thank you. I guess that concludes our panel. So thank you all panelists for being here. It was really insightful. I really loved the discussions we had. And thank you for everyone in the audience who attended and who submitted questions. It was really nice to be here. So thanks all of you, likewise. And I hope to see you in future events.
Thank you, Joshi, for the awesome moderation. Thank you to all the panelists. And yeah, I dropped here on the chat, the link to the agenda and for the YouTube playlist where we will be finding this recording very soon. And yeah, I think it was a great panel and also a philosophical one. I think we all reflected much more than just about research. And so I appreciate you for the work.
Yeah, it's amazing. And more research sessions tomorrow. So see you there.
See you there. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.